Hi everybody, Dan Illman, Mike Beer. 4 graded stakes races on tap at beautiful Belmont Park on Saturday. The problem, Mike Beer, is that the weather doesn't appear to be beautiful. We've got a very negative forecast with a ton of rain, and that could play right into the hooves of the number timeline as we take a look at the field of the first of 4 graded stakes races. The local prep for the Belmont Stakes, the Grade 3 Peter Pan.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like if we do get a really wet track out there that Chad Brown's going to be too disappointed. I mean, it almost looks like another one of those Saturday cards where Chad's going to win, I don't know, 4 or 5 or 6 races on the card, and maybe this is one of them no matter what happens. But if it rains, I mean, it's pretty hard to want to be too strong against this horse, I think.
Keeneland graduate Timeline worked hard to win his career debut going 7 furlongs, and then he caught a sloppy track for his first start against Winners. And he absolutely exploded against a fairly suspect field, but he won by about 14 lengths. He's got good tactical speed, and if he runs anything close to that number, these others have to improve a long way to beat him.
Yeah, you're right, though. It wasn't a good field. I mean, you want to be a little careful with horses like him who, run the big figure on a wet track, especially against a field like that one. I mean, that was not a good field of horses. On the other hand, I almost sort of like him more because of his debut than for his last one. I mean, he looked like a horse. First of all, he looked like a horse who might have needed his debut, but he figured it out at the end. And I like the way that he finished to close that field down. He's got all the pedigree in the world, this horse. And, they paid a lot of money for him. And it's Chad. His last race was really impressive. I think he's going to be really hard to beat here, wet track or not.
Now, he'll have to stretch out to 9 furlongs for the first time in his career. The number 3 Meantime, as we see from our Timeform US pace projector, not only has a 9 furlong win, but there's a good possibility that Meantime will be able to clear to the front under Jose Ortiz. And like Timeline, Meantime has a big race over a wet track.
Yeah, that wet track win at Keeneland last time, I mean, he won that race really easily, although in a similar manner to the Timeline race, that was an awful field he was in against, and he got control of the pace, and he did what he had to do in there. The problem I had with him as opposed to Timeline is I don't think I like his other 2 races that much. This horse is okay, and I know that he wanted a 1 1/8. I don't know if that's going to be his distance over time. I'm happy to be against this horse in this race and just see what happens.
Dale Roman sends out the number 4, Impressive Edge, a horse getting a little bit of a class drop. He was 4th in the Florida Derby most recently against next out Kentucky Derby winner Always Dreaming. He made a little bit of a run. It was his first time stretching all the way out. He flattened out late. It was a good solid performance, but he has to deal with a wet track and a pace scenario that may not be so fast.
Yeah, I mean, that may be a good thing for him if it's not fast. Maybe he can just get up close to the pace and won't have to work that hard. I don't see why you would think this horse can go 9 furlongs. I don't think he can go 9 furlongs. I mean, that Florida Derby, I know it was Always Dreaming he wasn't going to beat that horse, and maybe he wasn't going to beat Gunnevera either, but he didn't look like a horse who wanted distance to me. He got a pretty good trip in that race. He had no finish at all. That Florida Derby field outside of the 1 or 2 favorites, that was an awful field, and he never looked like he was going to win. When they turn him back, maybe I'll get interested. I don't like him in this race.
I have a negative formulator fact for his excellent trainer, Dale Romans. Over the past 5 years with 3-year-old dirt routers, off a short layoff in graded stakes, only 1 for 31 and a paltry 17-cent return on investment. Looking at Blessing, goes out for Nick Zito. Zito, we know, has upset the Belmont Stakes several times.
That's right.
He might try to do it with Looking at Blessing, using this race as a stepping stone to the Belmont. The good news, Looking at Blessing's lone lifetime win came at Belmont.
Yeah.
The bad news, he hasn't done very well against Winners.
Right. He got that win at Belmont, too, at a day where he just got... I mean, that was a really soft pace, and he got to the lead, and he managed to get it done that day. He's faced some good competition along the way, but he's not competitive with those horses. And he's facing some pretty good competition here, too.
He was in against No Dozing last time out, who came back to run 2nd in the Pat Day Mile over a wet track at Churchill with an 88 Beyer. Here's an interesting formulator fact for Chad's other runner, the stoutly bred number 6, Take Your Guns. Over the past 5 years, with 3-year-old last out maiden winners in dirt routes, 2nd off the layoff. He's 70%, and every single one of those 10 horses have hit the board. The ROI is sensational as well. Take Your Guns, when he made his career debut, he was the favorite in that Meantime race that was won by Patch. And I like that he was in and among horses. He learned a lot in that race, and he was punching on a little bit afterwards. And you got the feeling, boy, extra distance would help. Chad threw him in a 1 mile in an 8th race. He won comfortably. He's not brilliant, but he doesn't have to be perhaps at this distance. And his sire, Blame, is doing very well with wet track progeny from a limited sample.
Yeah, and this horse has a lot of stamina on the dam side, too. So the distance, I don't feel like is going to be a big problem for him. And obviously, he won at the 1 mile and 8th last time. I like the way that he won that race. He got a really good trip in that race, but he really finished strong from the top of the stretch to the way. I like that effort from him. I mean, I thought long and hard about maybe taking a shot against Timeline in here because there's a way to look at him and think at a really, really short price you may not want him. Ultimately, I'm taking him. But if I was going to try and beat him, I might try and do it with this horse because I think there's a lot of upside here.
So let's take a look at our picks for the Grade 3 Peter Pan, the local prep for the Belmont Stakes. We think that Timeline is going to make it 3 for 3 in his career, albeit at a very short price for trainer Chad Brown. We have to talk about Master Plan real quick before we go off the air because this horse is a major contender in this race. Master Plan has run on dirt only twice. Both of them on wet tracks, one in an off-the-turf race, one, of course, in the UAE Derby. Don't hold Thunder Snow's performance in the Kentucky Derby against the UAE Derby. I think that Master Plan is one of these late-developing 3-year-olds that's going to use this race as a prep and might come into the Belmont as sort of a sleeper.
He seems like he really wants to go a distance of ground. I think you're right about that. I mean, in a lot of ways, if Timeline doesn't win, this is probably the horse that wins. He's faced some really good competition and he's run well. I have no problem with his UAE Derby. He didn't look like he was ever going to win. But he was staying on at the end of that race. I felt the same way about the Pulp at the off-the-turf race where Tapwrit beat him. He was never going to win that race. And he got a good trip, but he was staying on at the end, sort of making some ground. In a lot of ways, I like his synth and his turf races better than his dirt races. So I wonder where he ultimately winds up. But he certainly has a big chance in this race.
And from a stamina perspective, you know he's going to be running late. So, Mike, you're going to go 2-1-6 in here. I'm going to go 2-1-4-3. Timeline over Master Plan. Chad over Pletcher. Currently at the Belmont meet, Chad and Todd 20 for 42. Approximate post time for the Grade 3 Peter Pan at Belmont Park on Saturday could be weather 3:04 Eastern. Good luck.